sir, may I have your badge number and the name of your supervisor?
All right.
Excuse me. Your badge number. I'm entitled.
Back up at pre-check lane 3.
Okay.
Non-compliant passenger, possibly hostile.
I'm not hostile. You just gotta...
Maybe you've always had questions.
Okay.
Always got something to say.
Always making demands.
At 7:42 a.m., inside Charlotte Douglas International Airport, a white police officer approached a black woman standing in the TSA pre-check line and told her she was in the wrong place. The woman was wearing a tailored Navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and holding credentials that identified her as a federal judge. Her name was Monique Johnson, 54 years old, appointed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate with bipartisan support. She had served on the federal bench for 9 years. The officer who stopped her, Darren Kovacs, 41, had spent 16 years with the Charlotte Airport Police Department. He had decided in the span of a single glance that she didn't belong, not in that line, not in that terminal, not anywhere near the expedited boarding lanes reserved for verified travelers. He didn't check her credentials, he didn't scan her identification, he looked at her skin color and made his judgment. What happened in the next 11 minutes was captured by 7 different security cameras positioned throughout the terminal concourse. Every word, every shove, every moment of escalation that would later be played in a federal courtroom, broadcast across national news, and viewed more than 50 million times online. What happened in those 11 minutes would trigger an FBI investigation, end multiple careers, send 3 officers to federal prison, and result in one of the largest civil rights settlements in airport police history. Officer Darren Kovacs had been with the Charlotte Airport Police Department since he was 25 years old. In that time, he had accumulated 31 formal complaints from travelers. 28 of those complaints involved black passengers. He had been accused of racial profiling, excessive force, unlawful detention, and verbal abuse more times than most officers receive complaints in an entire career. Not once had he faced a disciplinary hearing. Not once had he been suspended. Not once had any supervisor sat him down and told him his behavior was unacceptable. Instead, he had been promoted twice. Among his colleagues, Kovacs had earned a nickname. They called him the Gatekeeper. It wasn't a compliment from those who understood what it meant. He had made a habit of stationing himself near pre-check and priority boarding lanes, targeting black travelers for additional screening and questioning. He seemed to take personal satisfaction in making them prove they belonged. A black airline pilot in full uniform had been forced to produce 6 forms of identification before Kovacs would let him pass. A congressional aide traveling with a U.S. senator had been detained for 2 hours based on what Kovacs called suspicious behavior. She had been reading a book while waiting in line. Every complaint filed against him landed on the desk of Lieutenant Frank Ingram, his direct supervisor, and every complaint was dismissed. Insufficient evidence, conflicting accounts, no video available. The excuses varied, but the outcome never did. Kovacs walked away clean every single time, learning with each complaint that there would never be consequences for the way he treated people who looked like Monique Johnson. Judge Monique Johnson had spent her entire adult life in service to the law. She graduated from Harvard Law School at the top of her class, turned down offers from corporate firms paying 6 figures, and joined the U.S. Attorney's Office because she believed in justice. For 22 years, she prosecuted federal cases, organized crime, public corruption, civil rights violations. She sent dirty cops to prison. She dismantled trafficking rings. She stood in front of juries and spoke for victims who had no other voice. When the president nominated her to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Senate confirmed her 94-6. Republicans praised her fairness. Democrats praised her record. Legal scholars called her one of the most qualified judicial appointments in a generation. From the bench, she had issued landmark rulings on voting rights, police accountability, and equal protection under the law. Her opinions were cited in law school classrooms across the country. That morning, she was traveling to Washington, D.C. for an emergency hearing at the Supreme Court. A case involving federal sentencing guidelines required her presence, and she had booked the earliest flight out of Charlotte to make the 10 a.m. session. In her briefcase, she carried her federal judicial identification, her State Department travel clearance, and documentation granting her diplomatic courtesies at all U.S. ports of entry. She had credentials that could get her into secure facilities most Americans didn't know existed. She had chosen to travel without her usual security detail. It was a simple domestic flight, a routine trip she had made dozens of times before. She never imagined she would need protection inside an American airport. Kovacs stepped directly into Judge Johnson's path as she approached the pre-check entrance. His stance was wide, his hand resting on his belt, his expression already hostile. "Ma'am, this line is for verified travelers only," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Regular screening is over there." Judge Johnson stopped. She had dealt with men like this before in courtrooms, in depositions, in federal facilities where defendants thought intimidation would work on her. It never did. She reached into her briefcase calmly and produced her credentials. "I'm a federal judge," she said, holding out her judicial identification and pre-check documentation. "These are my credentials." Kovacs barely glanced at them. He didn't take the ID. He didn't scan the barcode. He didn't examine the holographic seal or the photograph that clearly matched the woman standing before him. He looked at her face, then back at the credentials, and shook his head. "These are probably fake," he said. "You're going to need additional screening." Behind her, white travelers passed through the line without a second glance. A businessman in a rumpled suit. A woman with 2 children pulling roller bags. An elderly couple moving slowly toward the scanners. None of them were stopped. None of them were questioned. Kovacs' partner, Officer Neil Stanton, 29, stood a few feet away watching the interaction. He said nothing, did nothing. The security cameras recorded everything, including the fact that Kovacs never once scanned or verified her credentials before deciding she didn't belong. Kovacs pointed toward a roped-off area beside the security checkpoint. "Step out of line," he said. "Now." Judge Johnson complied. She stepped to the side without argument, without raising her voice, without giving him any reason to escalate. But before moving further, she asked a simple question. "May I have your badge number and the name of your supervisor?" Kovacs' expression darkened. He reached for his radio. "I need backup at pre-check lane 3. I've got a non-compliant passenger." Judge Johnson's voice remained steady. "I'm not being non-compliant. I'm asking for your identification, as is my right." Kovacs ignored her. He stepped closer, crowding her space, and pointed at the wall beside the screening area. "Hands on the wall. You're getting a pat-down." "On what grounds?" she asked. That was when he grabbed her. His hand closed around her upper arm with force that would leave bruises visible for weeks. He yanked her toward the wall and shoved her forward. Her briefcase slipped from her grip and hit the floor, clasps popping open, legal documents scattering across the tile. Travelers nearby gasped. Several pulled out phones and began recording. Kovacs leaned in close, his voice loud enough for the cameras to capture every word. "You people always think you're above the law." Judge Johnson turned her head slightly, her cheek pressed near the wall, her voice calm despite the grip on her arm. "Officer, I am the law. I'm a federal judge on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals." Kovacs laughed. The sound was cruel, dismissive, dripping with contempt. "Sure you are," he said. "And I'm the Pope." Kovacs pulled his handcuffs from his belt. "You're being detained for disorderly conduct." Judge Johnson kept her hands visible, her posture compliant. "What specific conduct?" "I've followed every instruction. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't resisted." Kovacs didn't answer with words. He grabbed her right wrist and wrenched it behind her back with a violent twist. The motion was fast, brutal, and completely unnecessary. Judge Johnson cried out as her shoulder joint separated partially from its socket. The pain shot through her arm and into her chest. Before she could speak, Kovacs slammed her forward onto the metal screening table. Her face struck the surface hard, her glasses shattered on impact, a shard slicing into her cheek just below her left eye. Blood began running down her face immediately, bright red against the stainless steel surface, visible on every camera recording the scene. Kovacs forced her down and planted his knee into her upper back, pressing his full weight onto a 54-year-old woman with a dislocated shoulder and a bleeding face wound. "I'm not resisting," Judge Johnson said through clenched teeth. "You're injuring me. I need medical attention." Kovacs leaned down closer. "Should have thought about that before you got uppity." His partner, Officer Stanton, finally stepped forward. "Darren, maybe we should." Kovacs cut him off without looking back. "Shut up, Neil. I know how to handle these people." The cameras recorded everything. The blood on the table, the knee on her back, the words he chose. Every second of it documented and preserved. A man in a gray suit pushed through the gathering crowd. He was 62 years old, tall, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in positions of authority. His name was Colonel Samuel Okonjo, retired, former Judge Advocate General Attorney for the United States Army. He had prosecuted military crimes for 30 years. He knew excessive force when he saw it. "Officer, stop what you're doing immediately," Colonel Okonjo said, his voice cutting through the noise of the terminal. "That woman is injured and compliant. You have no legal basis for this level of force." Kovacs looked up, his knee still pressing into Judge Johnson's back. "Sir, step back, or you'll be arrested for interference with a police officer." Colonel Okonjo didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone already recording and dialed 911. His voice was calm, practiced, the voice of a man who had testified in hundreds of courtrooms. "I need to report an assault in progress at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, TSA pre-check area. The assault is being committed by an airport police officer against a restrained civilian. The victim is bleeding and requesting medical attention. Send emergency services immediately." Kovacs's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, a woman in a TSA supervisor uniform appeared. Denise Carrington had heard the commotion from across the checkpoint and pushed through the crowd. She took one look at the scene, the blood, the scattered documents, the federal judicial ID lying open on the floor, and her face went pale. "Officer," she said slowly, reaching for her radio, "do you know who this woman is?" Kovacs sneered. "I don't care if she's the Queen of England." Airport Police Chief Bernard Foley arrived 4 minutes later, slightly out of breath, his uniform still crisp, but his expression already tight with concern. He had received 3 calls in rapid succession, one from TSA, one from Airport Authority, and one from a city official who had seen a live video already circulating online. Denise Carrington intercepted him before he reached the scene. She leaned close and whispered a name. Chief Foley's face changed instantly. The color drained. His jaw went slack. He strode toward Kovacs with barely controlled urgency. "Remove the handcuffs," Foley said quietly. "Right now." Kovacs looked up, confused. "Chief, she was non-compliant. I have witnesses." "She. That's a federal appellate judge, you idiot." Foley's voice was low but sharp as a blade. "She sits on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. She was confirmed by the United States Senate. Remove the cuffs now." Kovacs' hands froze. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He unlocked the handcuffs and stepped back. Judge Johnson slowly pushed herself upright, cradling her injured arm against her chest. Blood still dripped from the cut beneath her eye. Chief Foley softened his tone, attempting damage control. "Your Honor, let's get you somewhere private. Medical attention, whatever you need." "I'm sure we can handle this internally without—" Judge Johnson turned to face him. Her voice was steady despite the pain. "Chief, I've spent 22 years prosecuting cover-ups. I know exactly what you're attempting right now." She glanced at the cameras overhead, then back at Foley. "And you're doing it on camera." Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found Judge Johnson sitting on a metal bench, her right arm hanging at an unnatural angle, blood drying on her cheek and jaw. The cut beneath her eye required 6 stitches. Her shoulder was confirmed as partially dislocated and would need to be reset at the hospital. She refused to leave. "I'm not going anywhere until I speak with the FBI," she said. The paramedics exchanged glances but didn't argue. The Charlotte FBI field office received a call at 8:14 a.m. 2 special agents were dispatched immediately and arrived at the terminal within 20 minutes. While they were en route, Chief Foley made another attempt at containment. He approached Colonel Okonjo and the other witnesses who had recorded the incident on their phones. "We're going to need to collect those devices as part of our investigation," Foley said. Colonel Okonjo didn't blink. "Confiscating witness recordings without a warrant is a federal offense, Chief. I'd advise you to step back." Foley retreated. From the back of the ambulance, Judge Johnson made a single phone call to the Chief Justice's office in Washington. She explained briefly what had happened. The emergency hearing she was scheduled to attend would have to be delayed. By 9 a.m., news alerts began appearing on phones across the country. Federal judge assaulted at Charlotte Airport. Appellate court judge bloodied by police. Kovacs was placed on administrative leave that morning, but witnesses later reported seeing him in the airport police break room less than an hour later, laughing with fellow officers. His initial incident report, filed at 10:47 a.m., claimed that Judge Johnson had become combative and refused lawful orders. The FBI subpoenaed Charlotte Douglas International Airport's security footage before noon. What they received was comprehensive and devastating. 7 different cameras had captured the incident from multiple angles. The footage showed Judge Johnson standing calmly in the pre-check line. It showed Kovacs approaching her unprompted. It showed her presenting credentials that he never examined. It showed her complying with every instruction, stepping out of line without protest, keeping her hands visible at all times. It showed Kovacs grabbing her arm, slamming her against the wall, throwing her onto the screening table, and driving his knee into her back while she bled onto the metal surface. The audio was equally damning. Every word Kovacs had spoken was captured with perfect clarity. "You people always think you're above the law. Should have thought about that before you got uppity. I know how to handle these people." His incident report was contradicted on every single point. Witness phone videos had already begun circulating online. Within 48 hours, the footage had been viewed more than 47 million times across multiple platforms. Comment sections filled with outrage. News networks played the clips on loop. But the most damaging evidence came from Kovacs's own body camera. He had reported that it malfunctioned during the incident, that no footage existed. FBI technicians recovered the recording from the department's cloud backup server. It showed Kovacs spotting Judge Johnson in line, turning to Officer Stanton, and saying with a smirk, "Watch me deal with this one." Within 1 week, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into the Charlotte Airport Police Department. What they found went far beyond a single officer. FBI interviews with current and former employees revealed a culture of institutional racism that had been allowed to flourish for years. Kovacs, it turned out, had made a game of it. He and a small group of officers had an informal betting pool. They wagered on how many minority travelers each of them could redirect away from pre-check lanes during a single shift. The officer with the highest count at the end of the week collected the pot. Investigators recovered emails from Lieutenant Frank Ingram's department account showing that he was not only aware of the betting pool, he had participated in it, he had placed bets, he had collected winnings. He had laughed at jokes about which officers were leading the league. The 31 complaints previously filed against Kovacs were pulled from the archives and re-examined. This time, investigators actually contacted the complainants. 19 former victims came forward publicly. A black cardiothoracic surgeon had been detained for 4 hours in 2019 while traveling to a medical conference. A black woman married to a Fortune 500 CEO had been taken to a private room and strip-searched based on what Kovacs called reasonable suspicion. A black Olympic athlete had missed his flight to a qualifying event after Kovacs selected him for random additional screening. Internal Affairs had dismissed every single complaint without conducting substantive investigations. The entire airport police command structure, from sergeants to the chief himself, was implicated in a systemic cover-up that had protected Kovacs for 16 years. A federal grand jury convened 6 weeks after the assault. The indictments came down on a Thursday morning. Officer Darren Kovacs was charged with assault under color of law pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, filing false federal reports, and obstruction of justice. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 20 years in federal prison. Lieutenant Frank Ingram was indicted as a co-conspirator. The charges against him included conspiracy to deprive civil rights, obstruction of justice, and failure to intervene in the commission of a federal crime. He had known what Kovacs was doing for years. He had protected him. He had participated in the betting pool that treated racial profiling as sport. Chief Bernard Foley was indicted separately for obstruction of justice and attempted cover-up. His actions at the scene, attempting to confiscate witness phones, offering to handle this internally, pressuring Judge Johnson not to escalate, were all captured on camera and constituted clear evidence of criminal intent. Officer Neil Stanton was granted immunity in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony. He sat before investigators and described what everyone in the department had known for years. "We all knew what Kovacs did," Stanton said. "We were told to look the other way. Anyone who complained got bad assignments, overnight shifts, paperwork duty, so nobody complained." State charges followed. Kovacs was additionally charged with assault causing bodily injury and official oppression. He was denied bail after prosecutors presented evidence that he had attempted to contact and intimidate witnesses through intermediaries. The federal trial of Darren Kovacs lasted 4 weeks. Every day, the courtroom filled with spectators, journalists, and civil rights advocates who had traveled from across the country to witness the proceedings. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. The security footage was played repeatedly from every available angle. Jurors watched in visible disgust as Kovacs grabbed Judge Johnson's arm, slammed her onto the screening table, and pressed his knee into her back while she bled. Several jurors looked away. One wiped tears from her eyes. Kovacs took the stand in his own defense. His attorney had advised against it, but Kovacs insisted. He told the jury he was just following training and that Judge Johnson had presented a suspicious profile that warranted additional screening. The cross-examination destroyed him. Prosecutors produced the department's official training materials, which explicitly prohibited the level of force Kovacs had used. They showed his text messages to fellow officers jokes about going on airport safari and celebrating when he caught another one. They played his body camera footage showing him smirking and saying, "Watch me deal with this one," before approaching a woman who had done nothing wrong. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Kovacs was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and received a lifetime ban from law enforcement in any capacity. Lieutenant Frank Ingram received 4 years, his cooperation during the investigation considered as a mitigating factor. Chief Bernard Foley received 3 years and was ordered to forfeit his pension. Officer Neil Stanton received probation, was terminated from the force, and was required to testify in all subsequent civil proceedings. 3 months after the criminal convictions, Judge Monique Johnson filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The defendants named in the complaint included Darren Kovacs, Frank Ingram, Bernard Foley, the City of Charlotte, and the Charlotte Airport Authority. The lawsuit alleged systemic discrimination, failure to train, failure to supervise, and deliberate indifference to the constitutional rights of minority travelers. Discovery revealed the full scope of the department's failures. Over the previous 10 years, 847 complaints had been filed against Charlotte Airport police officers. 91% of those complaints involved minority travelers. Not a single complaint had resulted in a sustained finding against any officer. Expert witnesses testified that such a statistical pattern was impossible without systemic discrimination embedded in departmental policy and practice. The city's attorneys attempted to settle. They offered $5 million to make the case go away quietly. Judge Johnson refused. She demanded full accountability policy changes, independent oversight, a public admission of wrongdoing, and the creation of a civilian review board with real authority. The city refused her terms. The trial proceeded. After 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and expert analysis, the jury returned its verdict. They awarded $12.4 million in compensatory damages for Judge Johnson's physical injuries, emotional distress, and harm to her professional reputation. They added $8.7 million in punitive damages against the individual officers. The total $21.1 million was the largest civil rights verdict against an airport police department in American history. In the months that followed, 19 other victims filed their own lawsuits. Their settlements totaled an additional $14 million. Judge Monique Johnson returned to the bench 3 months after the assault. Her shoulder had healed, though she would carry a faint scar beneath her left eye for the rest of her life. Her first case back was a civil rights matter involving police misconduct, a fact that did not escape the notice of legal observers watching her courtroom. She used a significant portion of her settlement funds to establish the Johnson Justice Initiative, a nonprofit organization providing free legal representation to victims of discrimination who could not afford attorneys. Within its first year, the initiative took on more than 200 cases nationwide. The Charlotte Airport Police Department was disbanded entirely. The city rebuilt the force from the ground up with new leadership, new hiring standards, and new accountability structures. Mandatory bias training became required for all officers. A civilian oversight board was created with the power to investigate complaints independently. Every allegation of misconduct would now be reviewed by an outside body with no ties to the department. A federal consent decree required 10 years of Department of Justice monitoring to ensure compliance. Darren Kovacs served his sentence at a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. He never apologized. He filed 3 appeals, all of which were denied. In a prison interview conducted 2 years into his sentence, he showed no remorse. "I was doing my job," he said. "She should have just complied." Judge Johnson responded in an interview of her own. "I did comply," she said. "I complied with every request while being assaulted." Compliance isn't the issue. The issue is that some officers see black skin and see a threat, regardless of credentials, accomplishments, or behavior. My robe didn't protect me. My credentials didn't protect me. The only thing that protected me was that camera. 2 years after the incident, Judge Johnson walked through Charlotte Douglas International Airport on her way to another hearing in Washington. Her head was high. Her stride was steady. TSA agents nodded respectfully as she passed. Officer Darren Kovacs thought he could assault a black woman and face no consequences. He forgot that the cameras were watching. He forgot that truth has a way of surfacing. And he forgot that sometimes the person you target has spent her entire career ensuring that justice prevails even when it's delayed. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, if you're someone who lies awake at 2 or 3 a.m., mind racing, unable to shut off, I know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't stop. And the worst part? The less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes, your mood suffers, everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with this for years. Tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk, nothing worked long term. Then I found something called the 30-Day Uninterrupted Sleep Reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that actually retrains your brain to sleep through the night, 7 to 8 hours, uninterrupted. Over 30 days, it rewires your sleep system. And once you're done, you keep the results, there's a maintenance plan, so you don't slip back. Look, if you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. Check the link in the description. Seriously, try it. And I'll catch you in the next story.